So I'm going to read a bit of Sri Aurobindo from the Life Divine, and I'm putting it on Red Light Rocket 4 just in case people that watch my videos on Thou Art That don't care for videos where I'm just reading, but I have to read this anyways, and Aurobindo is the kind of writer, and more than a writer, visionary, mystic, yogi, who is best read aloud because his voice comes through so strongly in the text that to fully hear and be affected by what he has to say, I think it needs to be brought to life as speech, not just silently thought as one reads to oneself. So I hope you'll join me. So I'm going to start partway into this chapter, chapter 2, the two negations, part 1, the materialist denial. Aurobindo writes, "In Europe and in India, respectfully, the negation of the materialist and the refusal of the ascetic have sought to assert themselves as the sole truth and to dominate the conception of life. In India, if the result has been a great heaping up of the treasures of the spirit, or of some of them, it has also been a great bankruptcy of life. In Europe, the fullness of riches and the triumphant mastery of this world's powers and possessions have progressed towards an equal bankruptcy in the things of the spirit. Nor has the intellect, which sought the solution of all problems in the one term of matter, found satisfaction in the answer that it has received. Therefore, the time grows ripe, and the tendency of the world moves towards a new and comprehensive affirmation in thought and in inner and outer experience, and to its corollary, a new and rich fulfillment in an integral human existence for the individual and for the race. From the difference in relations of spirit and matter to the unknowable which they both represent, there arises also a difference of effectiveness in the material and the spiritual negations. The denial of the materialist, although more insistent and immediately successful, more facile in its appeal to the generality of mankind, is yet less enduring, less effective, finally, than the absorbing and perilous refusal of the ascetic. For it, materialism, carries within itself its own cure. Its most powerful element is the agnosticism, which, admitting the unknowable behind all manifestation, extends the limits of the unknowable until it comprehends all that is merely unknown. Its premise is that the physical senses are our sole means of knowledge, and that reason, therefore, even in its most extended and vigorous flights, cannot escape beyond their domain. It must deal always and solely with the facts which they provide or suggest, and the suggestions themselves must always be kept tied to their origins. We cannot go beyond. We cannot use them as a bridge leading us to a domain where more powerful and less limited faculties come into play, and another kind of inquiry has to be instituted. A premise so arbitrary pronounces on itself its own sentence of insufficiency. It can only be maintained by ignoring or explaining away all that vast field of evidence and experience which contradicts it, denying or disparaging noble and useful faculties, active consciously or obscurely, or at worst latent in all human beings, and refusing to investigate supraphysical phenomena except as manifested in relation to matter and its movements, and conceived as a subordinate activity of material forces. As soon as we begin to investigate the operations of mind and of supermind in themselves and without the prejudgment that is determined from the beginning to see in them only a subordinate term of matter, we come into contact with a mass of phenomena which escape entirely from the rigid hold, the limiting dogmatism of the materialist formula. I hope you're following these huge sentences. I know they're difficult. And the moment we recognize, as our enlarging experience compels us to recognize, that there are in the universe knowable realities beyond the range of the senses, and in man powers and faculties which determine, rather than are determined by, the material organs through which they hold themselves in touch with the world of the senses. That outer shell of our true and complete existence, the premise of materialistic agnosticism, disappears. We are ready for a large statement and an ever-developing inquiry. But first, it is well that we should recognize the enormous, the indispensable utility of the very brief period of rationalistic materialism through which humanity has been passing. For that vast field of evidence and experience, which now begins to reopen its gates to us, can only be safely entered when the intellect has been severely trained to a clear austerity. Seized on by unripe minds, it lends itself to the most perilous distortions and misleading imaginations, and actually, in the past, encrusted a real nucleus of truth with such an accretion of perverting superstitions and irrationalizing dogmas that all advance in true knowledge was rendered impossible. It became necessary for a time to make a clean sweep at once of the truth and its disguise, in order that the road might be clear for a new departure and a surer advance. The rationalistic tendency of materialism has done mankind this great service. For the faculties that transcend the senses, by the very fact of their being enmeshed in matter, mission to work in a physical body, put in harness to draw one car along with the emotional desires and nervous impulses, are exposed to a mixed functioning in which they are in danger of illuminating confusion rather than clarifying truth. So all that was about the faculties that transcend the senses. Especially in this mixed functioning, dangerous. Especially is this mixed functioning dangerous when men with unchastened minds and unpurified sensibilities attempt to rise into the higher domains of spiritual experience. In what regions of unsubstantial cloud and semi-brilliant fog, or a murk visited by flashes which blind more than they enlighten, do they not lose themselves by that rash and premature adventure? An adventure necessary indeed in the way in which nature chooses to effect her advance, for she amuses herself as she works, but still, for the reason, rash and premature. It is necessary, therefore, that advancing knowledge should base herself on a clear, pure, and disciplined intellect. It is necessary, too, that she should correct her errors sometimes by a return to the restraint of sensible fact, the concrete realities of the physical world. It's interesting that he's referring to knowledge as she. Maybe he's talking about wisdom or Sophia. I'm going to stop there and go to part 2.